My daughter-in-law dumped her leftover coffee onto my newspaper and told me the table needed clearing. My son kept scrolling his phone while his wife poured cold coffee across the sports section I was reading and told me the table needed to be cleared now anyway. What she did not know was that I had already decided 2 weeks earlier exactly what I was going to do about the $85,000 line of credit I had guaranteed for him. My name is Roger Callahan. I am 63 years old. I spent 31 years as a commercial HVAC supervisor before I retired, which mostly means I spent 3 decades getting yelled at by building managers because their rooftop units were making noises that were in fact completely normal. My wife says I have the temperament of a man who has been on hold with a customer service line since 1994. She is not wrong. Before I tell you what I did next, tell me where you are watching this from. I would love to know. My wife Sandra and I live in a 3-bedroom ranch house on Bayshore Terrace in Tampa, Florida. The same house we bought in 1998. Our son Brett lives about 11 minutes away on Kennedy Boulevard with his wife Kayla. And every Tuesday morning for the last 4 years, I have driven over there for breakfast while Sandra plays pickleball with her sister. Sandra and I have been married 35 years. I was 28 when we got married. She was 26. Brett came along 2 years later, so he is 33 now, which means the math on all of this holds up the way it should. Sandra still works 2 mornings a week at a dental office doing billing, mostly, she says, because she likes having somewhere to wear her good shoes. She is sharp enough to catch a coding error on an insurance claim from across the room, and she has never once let me finish a sentence when she already knows where it is going. My best friend Dennis Whitfield and I have known each other since 1987, back when we were both installing ductwork for the same contractor in Clearwater. He is loud, he is loyal, and he has picked up the phone on the first ring every single time I have called him in 20 years, including the time I called him at 2 a.m. because I thought I heard a raccoon in the attic. It was a raccoon. Dennis brought a broom. Kayla started as a loan officer at Suncoast Coastal Credit Union about 3 years ago. When Brett wanted to start a business distributing HVAC parts to independent contractors around Hillsborough County, I offered to personally guarantee an $85,000 line of credit through Suncoast Coastal, since I knew the industry and I trusted him. Kayla was not supposed to be the one to process it, since I was her husband's father, but she told the branch manager she'd disclose it as a related party file and handle it by the book, and nobody questioned her. Because nobody at that branch had ever questioned her about anything. I remember thinking at the time that it was convenient having someone in the family who understood the account inside and out. I did not think about what that also meant. The warning signs started small. Around March, my monthly paper statements from Suncoast Coastal stopped showing up. I mentioned it to Sandra, who said the post office had been dropping the ball on everything lately, including her prescription refill notice, so I figured it was the same story. In April, Brett mentioned that the shop on Adamo Drive he'd been renting for inventory had changed plans a little, and when I asked what that meant, Kayla answered for him and said they were being smart about overhead. I let it go because Kayla talks in bank language the way I talk in duct sizes. And I have learned not to argue with people who understand a system better than I do. In May, during breakfast, I noticed Kayla's phone buzz with a notification that said, Suncoast Coastal Alert, and she turned the phone face down without looking at it, which struck me as odd for someone who works there, but I told myself she probably gets 40 of those a day. Then came the Tuesday in question. I had the newspaper open to the box scores. Kayla's sister Meredith was visiting from Ocala and sitting across from me, and Brett was on his phone the way he always is at that table. Kayla came around with the coffee pot, looked at my cup, decided it was cold, and instead of asking, she poured it directly across the newspaper in my hands. This table needs to be cleared now anyway, she said. Already reaching for napkins, Brett did not look up. Meredith looked at her plate. I folded the wet paper in half, set it down, finished my coffee, and drove home. That Thursday, I called Suncoast Coastal Credit Union directly and asked to speak to someone about the guarantor status on the line of credit since I hadn't seen a statement in months. The woman on the phone, a customer service rep named Priya, put me on hold for 11 minutes, then came back and asked to verify my identity 3 separate times before she would tell me anything. When she finally pulled up the account, she went quiet for a second and said, "Sir, it looks like the correspondence preference on this account was changed to electronic only back in February. And the email on file isn't yours. I asked whose it was." She told me she couldn't disclose that without a supervisor. I asked her to check one more thing, the current balance and payment status. She read it back to me plainly, $74,100 outstanding, 47 days past due. Next step is referral to collections in 13 days. I sat at my kitchen table for a long time after I hung up, looking at the wall calendar Sandra keeps by the phone, doing the math on 13 days. I called Dennis that same afternoon. He picked up on the second ring, said, "Rog, you sound like a man who just found a body." And I told him everything. The statements, the account change, the 13 days. He was quiet for a second, which for Dennis is unusual. Then he said, "So let me get this straight. Your daughter-in-law works at the bank that holds your guarantee, and your statement stopped coming the same month you noticed Brett's shop lease changed plans." "I said that's about the size of it," Dennis said. "Rog, I love you, but you have been letting that girl run circles around you because she talks fast and you don't like conflict. Call Renee tomorrow morning. First thing. If your name had been quietly removed from your own account and you had 13 days before collections got involved, what would you have done first?" Renee Ashworth has been Sandra's cousin's divorce attorney, my old contractor's business attorney, and now, as of that Friday morning, mine. She is somewhere in her 50s, wears reading glasses on a chain she never actually uses, and told me on the phone before I'd finished my second sentence, "Roger, stop apologizing for calling me. This is what I do." I brought her every document I could find. The original guarantee agreement from 18 months earlier, Priya's callback confirming the balance and the correspondence change, and a folder of receipts Sandra had helped me pull from our joint bank statements, showing 3 transfers from the business line totaling $22,000 that had gone out to a company called Renwick Interior Concepts, LLC, which it turned out was Kayla's. Side boutique on Swan Avenue, Renee's first move was a written demand to Suncoast Coastal's compliance department invoking my rights as guarantor, and formally requesting an internal review of who had accessed and modified the account and when. Her second move was pulling my personal guarantee off any future draws, effective immediately, which the credit union was contractually required to honor once formally notified in writing. Her third move, the one she seemed to enjoy the most, was calling Suncoast Coastal's compliance officer directly and asking, very politely, whether an employee redirecting a family member's account correspondence to conceal a delinquency was something they'd like to handle internally or something she should mention to the Florida Office of Financial Regulation. There was a pause on the line. She told me later that pause was worth the whole retainer. 2 weeks after Renee sent that letter, Sandra and I invited Brett and Kayla over for dinner. Renee's idea, on our turf, our kitchen table on Bayshore Terrace. Kayla walked in first, cheerful, talking about a listing she'd seen on Swan Avenue, and sat down like it was any other Tuesday. Brett looked tired in a way I hadn't noticed before. I let Kayla talk for a while about the business doing fine, about a slow season, about how banks always overreact to a few late payments. Then I set the folder on the table. I said, "Kayla, I talked to Priya at the credit union on the 9th. She told me the correspondence on the account was switched to an email that wasn't mine back in February." Kayla's smile didn't move, but her hand did, just slightly, toward her coffee cup. She said that must have been a system error. Those things happen with online banking updates all the time. I said, "That's what I thought, too." So I had Renee ask compliance whether a system error can also move $22,000 into an LLC registered at your business address. Brett looked at her. She said the boutique money was a short-term loan between them. She was going to put it back before I ever needed to know. I said, "Kayla, I'm the guarantor. I was always going to need to know." She tried once more, said I was overreacting, that family doesn't sue family, that this was going to blow everything up over a misunderstanding. I told her I hadn't sued anybody. I told her Suncoast Coastal's own compliance department had opened the file. That was the fact she couldn't argue with because it wasn't mine. It was theirs. She went quiet. Brett put his hand over hers on the table, and for the first time all night, neither of them said anything at all. Here is what happened after. Suncoast Coastal's internal investigation confirmed. Kayla had processed a related party loan she should have disclosed and recused herself from, then used her employee access to redirect the account correspondence and conceal the delinquency for months before I found out. She was terminated in July under the credit union's misconduct policy, and the matter was reported to the Florida Office of Financial Regulation, since employee misconduct involving member accounts falls under mandatory reporting for state-chartered credit unions. Renee told me the $22,000 diverted into Renwick Interior Concepts, LLC was large enough to potentially support a charge under Florida's organized fraud statute, a second-degree felony at that dollar amount, and that the correspondence tampering separately exposed her to a charge under Florida's Computer Crimes Act for unauthorized access to a protected account. As of the last update I had, the state attorney's office in Hillsborough County was still reviewing the referral, and no charges had been filed. Financially, Brett sold off the shop's remaining inventory and equipment through a liquidation broker on Adamo Drive, which covered $58,000 of the $100 balance. Renee negotiated the remainder down and structured it as a personal repayment plan between Brett and the credit union directly, with my guarantee formally released once the settlement was signed in August. My credit was never actually damaged since the account never reached collections, but I will admit I checked my score twice a week for a month anyway. Brett and Kayla separated in September. Last I heard from Dennis, who still plays golf with Brett's father-in-law, Kayla had moved back to Ocala. Brett started a smaller version of the business on his own. No partners, no guarantees, just him in a used van. And he calls me now most Sundays instead of Tuesdays. As for me, it took a few months before I stopped instinctively checking the mailbox for a statement that used to come every month and then quietly didn't. Dennis still calls me Rog the Detective, which I have decided to allow. 3 Sundays ago, Brett came by the house on Bayshore Terrace with a box of parts he wanted my opinion on, and we sat on the back porch for 2 hours while Sandra brought out iced tea and pretended not to listen. At one point, Brett said, "Dad, I should have asked more questions back then." I said, "Son, you should have looked up from your phone more, too." And he laughed. Actually laughed. For the first time in months. Later that night, after Brett left, Sandra was drying the last glass and looking at the calendar by the phone, the same one I'd stared at for 13 days back in June. She set the towel down, looked at me, and said, "Roger, you know what I've decided? Next Tuesday breakfast is at our house. I make the coffee." I said that sounded like the best idea anyone had had in a year. She said, "Obviously, somebody around here has to know how to pour it properly.